Hey, Janice.
Hi, Anthony.
Today, let's talk about how to sell a deceased person's home. So, when I did an episode like this earlier, and I got a lot of comments basically criticizing me that this was information. They thought that there was information for how to sort of find like people you don't know, completely random people who died, and try to sell their houses out from under them.
Oh,
That's not what this is.
no, definitely not.
If you're looking for that, you could just click away because that's not what we're talking about.
No. That's like HGTV stuff where no.
No. We are talking about if you are one of the rightful heirs
Yes.
or named
Okay.
in the will. What are the logistic steps that you have to do to, what is the process for selling the home of a deceased person who you know?
Okay, that does make more sense. Yes.
So all the cynics out there, that is not what we're talking about. All right, so let's get into this. How to sell a deceased person's home who you know. The first step is to figure out, did the deceased person actually own the property?
Ah,
Hilariously,
important.
well, to me, this is often, not that clear. Janice, we get a lot of calls from potential clients who say, "Oh, my grandfather died and he owned his house," and then you or I look at the records and no, he didn't. He was a renter.
No, just been renting for 100 years.
Yeah.
Yep. Very common.
Yeah. So what you got to do is you need to pull up the deed. Just Google the county where the person passed away and register of deeds or how to find a deed. Google's great for helping you find the.
Oh yeah, you can find it. You can find anything.
And most records are online now, so and it's public record. You don't need to. You can look up anyone's deed. So look it up and see how it reads. Now, a couple situations that might come up. So what if there are two names on the deed and one of the persons has died? So that can be one of a couple of different scenarios. If it's a husband and wife, and let's say who usually dies first, husband passed away. If it's that type of deed, then the house automatically goes to the wife. You don't really have to do anything in terms of the probate court, at least. Similarly, if the deed is a joint tenant deed, so like let's say Jack and Jill as joint tenants, if it has that wording, and let's say Jack died, then yeah, Jill is now the sole owner without having to go to probate court, which we'll talk about in a later subsection. However, if it says Jack and Jill and nothing else, and Jack and Jill are not a husband and wife, or if it says Jack and Jill, comma, tenants in common, and talk to a lawyer about this. Don't rely on this podcast for all these minutiae, but I'm just giving you a general understanding. If it says that, then if Jack passed away, then his estate continues to own half, and Jill owns the other half. So you do have to go to probate to deal with Jack's deceased half. All right? I know that's a lot to swallow, but I'm just giving you a sense of, look, when you have two names on the deed, it can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Is it fair to leave it at that?
No, and it's a good, like you said, the first step is pull the deed, see what it says. And then when you talk to an attorney, you'll be able to explain, this is what it says, and you'll have just more information.
Totally. Very good. So what happens to a house in trust after death? So sometimes you'll pull the deed and it won't say Jack. I'm going to stick with that analogy. It won't say Jack. It'll say Jack's revocable trust. And what that means is before he passed away, he did some planning and Jack transferred title from his house from his name into his trust's name. And we talked about this in previous episodes. What that means is there's an entity called a trust that it's like a wrapper around assets. And this rapper has rules. Rapper, WRAPPER, not the music artist.
Not a music rapper?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you have to do is you need to figure out where, who has a copy of the trust contract or instrument or agreement. And what are the rules? What happens when Jack dies? Because the trust dictates. The trust has its own set of rules on that. And again, you probably don't have to go to probate court. And then lastly, the one we talked about before, the person, Jack, just didn't own his home. He was either a renter or he was living in a house that actually was still in his grandma's name. See that a lot.
Oh, yes.
So, just got to figure it out.
Complication.
Yep. Look up the deed, talk to family, just figure out who actually owned the property. All right.
And like you said, it's available online. I mean, you can get almost, and if you can't get it online, you can call the recorder of deeds and somehow get a copy of it. I mean, it is accessible.
For sure. All right. So next. You've looked up the deed and you figured out it's one of those scenarios where you probably need probate. So let's talk about why do you need probate to sell a house. Can you sell a deceased person's house without probate? Yes, in some of the circumstances we just talked about, where it's already in a trust, or if the deed was not in Jack's name alone, if there was a wife or a joint tenant, then you probably don't need probate. But if it was in Jack's name alone, then you probably need probate. And so here's a pro tip, especially in New York. Some people will try to tell you, some real estate fast movers, some brokers who are trying to close you. No offense to my broker friends. But some will argue that technically you could be able to sell the house without probate if you get an affidavit of heirship from all the children or all the nephews, whatever the case may be. Yeah, that's sometimes technically true, but most cases, title will not go for that. Title is title insurance is what the buyer is basically, the title insurance will be protecting the buyer to make sure that the seller actually owns and can sell the property. So if you try to do it with an affidavit of heirship, which is basically saying like, no, I promise, I really am the one who's entitled to sell this property, then the buyer's title insurance company will probably say, no, that's not good enough. Go to court.
Right, because that's a huge liability for them to ensure that there isn't any issues.
Exactly. So another reason why you probably have to go to, or you may have to go to probate after somebody passes away, and in order to get moving with selling a deceased person's house, is because you need to get access. How do you get access to a house after death? So what happens is when somebody passes away at home, at least in New York City, tell me if this is true in Pennsylvania, Janice, but in New York City, when somebody dies at home, the apartment is sealed with the police tape, with that yellow and black police tape. Okay. You cannot enter. You cannot break that. Yeah, you cannot break that seal unless you are accompanied by an officer from the precinct who needs to see your, letters testamentary, the proof that you are the court-appointed executor or administrator. And who monitors this? The landlord, the super, the building management. If it's a condo or co-op, they want to see proof before they give you access. Is that the case in Pennsylvania? Do you know?
It is not. They don't police tape it and allow you to get in. Usually the heirs have their access while the probate proceedings are being initiated.
Now remember, I'm talking about where the person died alone at home. In that particular. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. No police tape. I mean, I'm talking about the burbs, so it could be a little bit different in a lot of areas, but no. The police don't usually get involved with taping it up or anything. So it's an interesting concept that when you get into New York and you literally cannot get in.
Nope. And think about it from the condo or co-op's point of view. They don't want to be held liable for letting the wrong person in. So it's for their own protection to make sure they have the correct person getting in there.
After all, we have seen some heirs in the past that would just go in and help themselves. So I get it.
Okay. And, if you're thinking, I'll do anything to avoid probate, that might not be the right mindset, because if you think about it, who does probate protect? Probate is a process that's meant to protect you and as an heir and you as the executor, and it protects everyone from the IRS and creditors, popping up years later saying, hey, you never did probate, but you took the money from the sale of the house. So, hey, you owe us $10,000.
Right.
But you need to close the books on everything, and that's part of what probate is, making sure everything has been done properly and there's no loose ends.
Sometimes having to go through these extra steps, like you said, will thwart any problems later on. Where could you imagine getting a $10,000 bill years after the money's all gone?
I don't have to imagine. It happens to our estates. That's why we do reserves.
Right. But I mean, that would be it's awful. So
yeah, for sure. All right, so let's get into considerations when choosing an executor. This is, again, for when you're trying to sell the home of a deceased person. So I do have an article on the website of how to choose an executor. So check that out. That'll give you some sort of more nitty-gritty, fleshed out conversation or discussion of how to choose an executor. But we're going to talk about a few points specific to selling a deceased person's property. So the first question you should ask, many people ask, is, does the executor have to live in the same state, live here in New York? The answer is technically no. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can live outside of New York State and be the executor. But in reality and in practice, think about it. Do you have to travel to New York for probate? Yup. Unfortunately, a large percentage of your duties as an executor must be done in person. And everyone asks the same question. Are you joking? It's 2020. I have,
right.
I have chat. I have live chat. I have Twitter. I have websites, I have apps, and I have to come in person. That doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
I know it
Oh,
doesn't
and
sound
boy,
right.
we agree, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And not only a U.S. citizen, what else are we just running into is that, okay, it's one thing to be a U.S. citizen living abroad, but you have to have a permanent address in the U.S. to do a lot of these, the bankings and transfers and everything else. So
again,
definitely tricky.
It's technically correct to say that New York law does not require that an executor, like the law does not prohibit the court from giving letters of executorship to a U.S. citizen who doesn't live in New York. That's the sort of law. But the reality is banks will not transact with you, or you'll have a lot of difficulty actually serving as the executor. So that's what I'm trying to say here.
Right. And not just a lot of difficulty, but in some cases an extraordinary amount of difficulty. Yes.
So then lastly, you might want to think about when is an estate bond required. Again, we have another article on estate bonds in general. It's sort of an insurance instrument that the court will sometimes ask the executor to purchase and file with the court. And basically, to be able to do this, you need excellent credit. We're talking high 700s, maybe low 700s if it's a smaller estate. So when you're deciding, okay, who's the right person, and there's a chance there might be a bond involved, make sure you're getting somebody who's going to qualify. Otherwise, you're going to end up doing all this work, getting to the finish line, and the court's going to say, okay, last step before we appoint you executors, you need to file a bond. It's like, well, I was bankrupt last year. I don't know how to do that.
Right. No bond for you.
Yeah. All right. So next, let's talk about how to empty a house after death. And this is our last point on this. When I say empty, I mean that from a couple of different perspectives. I mean, empty the people and empty the stuff.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this is what we see. There's a lot of times where you need to evict after the death of the owner. So let's talk about, let's say, a multifamily home where our decedent, Jack, lived in the ground floor, but he rented out the second floor. It happens all the time.
Yes.
Sadly, Janice, you've seen this.
Yeah.
Tenants seem to think once the landlord passes away, they don't have to pay anymore, or do any, or they don't. They just it's now their place apparently.
Right. They just stay and do not pay and live for free.
Yeah, it's actually
so
like more than half the time, I would say.
It's very, very common.
So my advice is to, if you get any even sniff of a bad tenant or any problems, start the eviction proceedings immediately, because they do take time. They take at least 6 to 9 months in New York, probably longer now with the current situations.
Yes.
So you want to get that ball rolling immediately instead of waiting 3 or 4 months to see if things will get better and then starting that 6 to 9 month period. So you're just kicking the can down the road even further if you wait too long.
Yes. Yep.
Also, a lot of folks ask, can an heir be evicted? Because sometimes that tenant on the second floor is not some random, but it's the nephew or your brother.
Right.
Who happens to also be inheriting. And yes, the short answer is yes. You can even evict family. It's a little tougher. It's a little more, there's more steps and more complications, but you should start that, everything I just said, start that sooner than later. Otherwise, again, things keep just taking longer and longer.
Yeah, eviction is not a quick process by any means.
Not at all. So lastly, on how to empty a house after death, when you're trying to sell the house of a deceased person, how do you go about removing the items from the house after death? So this is something that we've dealt with, cleaning out the deceased estate and disposing with the deceased's belongings. A couple ways of going about that. Sometimes step one, we take pictures and video of everything in the house and distribute that to all the family members. What would you like? And what are you willing to pay for shipping to have shipped to you? Right? And then once that's done, by the way, this is of course after we've satisfied everything in the will. But most people don't say, my every item of furniture and every item of clothing.
Right.
And then we ask friends and close, who else would like. And then lastly, we don't often do estate sales. Estate sales are really tough to do in Manhattan. You don't really have a lot of foot traffic. So we actually work with consignment shops or just clean out companies, because a lot of stuff is just not worth it. Like even the Salvation Army won't come pick up certain things.
Oh yeah, we've tried to donate things. Sometimes you can, but some things just aren't salvageable.
Yeah, so sometimes you just need to pay somebody to make the apartment empty.
Yeah, make it all disappear. Yes.
So that is it. Yep, those are the steps that you should really think about if you're in the position of if you're an heir, a rightful heir,
Rightful heir.
and you need to you're wondering how to sell a deceased person's house. And yeah, that's it, Janice.
Absolutely. So to dig in a little bit more with this, How Probate Works, Anthony's book, available on Amazon. It's a guide for executors, heirs, and families. It does talk about this and some other things that you're going to have to possibly deal with.
Yeah. All right, that's it for today. Thank you, Janice, as always. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk next time. Take care.
Talk soon.
Bye now.